for people who are joining us from ESCAP, Bangkok, because I know it's the afternoon already there. Welcome to this Source to Acquire LPE, Local Process Expert Training. So my name is Cyril Momo from the training team. But before going and introducing you the rest of the team member that will lead this training for the next 5 days, I would like to stretch out very much the importance of Source to Acquire. Why are we doing this training? You're doing this training because Source to Acquire is a central process in supply chain management itself. But it's not only a central process, it's also a process that has a clear impact on many modules and also key activities. You can see from my screen right now, the slide. Source to Acquire is really central. So it's really important to understand and assimilate how to perform transaction correctly in Source to Acquire. Because if you don't, you will have an impact on, for example, transportation management. Let's say if you put an input in wrong Incoterm, for example, you will have an impact on the liability, how the transportation will be done. If you put a wrong delivering address, if you select a wrong purchasing group, for example, it will have impact. So all those notions and importance and key points will be explained to you during this training. It's really important. Pyro, when you acquire a good, you do requisitioning from your shopping cart, you select some product ID. But there are cases where the same product IDs is selected for many materials, which is wrong and impact the correctness of the equipment records. It creates also issue in raising shopping carts, and PO. And even the system contract and local contracts are wrong. So these elements, these key things are really important to know when you're working on source and acquisition. So you can see here, Pyro is not a module of Umoja, but it's an initiative of physical inventorying and reconciliation that was done a couple of years ago, within entity to make sure that we do process requisitioning and procurement correctly, so all the financial impacts will be minimized. So same thing for DPSNP. This is demand planning, supply network planning. It's a new module that is coming in Umoja. It will be implemented in a few weeks. Also from there, you'll have upstream impact. Right? You will formulate your gross and net demand, and you will acquire a couple of material from different sourcing routes. So if you acquire the material from a source that is not correct, or you acquire the wrong material, of course, you will have a wrong forecast on your demand. Right? Same thing on BI and analysis. If you do a wrong requisitioning and a wrong procurement process, you cannot monitor correctly your performance. So your data metrics will be wrong. Your performance report in BI will be wrong. So all this to really stretch out the importance to follow this training properly and make sure that you understand how the transaction and the process in source and requisitioning and procurement should be done. So, and this is really a, I will say, symmetric training, not asymmetric. So you will not just listening to the trainer, but you will also, you're looking forward to your engagement as well. Because when you engage, you share your experience, business scenario, real case from your entity, and through discussion, you will understand more what has to be done. So it's really a collective learning experience, I think I will say. Right. So now, that being said, I would like to introduce you the UCS Training Team. So we are a team of 10 people. You do many things. You can see from the pictures, you have many people are familiar to you, all the members of the team, Yolanda, Brian, Daniel, Saul. You have new people, Saida, myself, Valentina, and both Elena. So what you do, you deliver training, of course. from the inception of the training, pre-training, logistics, right, to the delivery of the training, and you do it through different methodology. We started a few years ago with instructor-led training, so presential. Now you're moving more towards the online methodology, right? You provide also support in writing job aids and developing material, training material. We do also administration of courses in Espira. Many of you may know what you're talking about. And we also provide support post-training during ramp-up when you do a new implementation, or even after a training like this, when people ask questions, they wanted to understand uh, clarification on different process that were taught during the training. So few global statistics in 2019. Here, what I want mainly to show is the number of people that we have reached so far. You can see in summary, we have reached almost 1,500 students in 2019 with an average of 10 hours of training per session. So that means if you have an average when you do online training 2 hours per day, so that means each training takes us at least a week to do. And since January, you are moving more, as I said earlier, toward the e-learning methodology. And it becomes very relevant these days with the pandemic of COVID-19 to do those type of delivering methodology. So it's really important pretty much to see how we adapt to the environment and the new way, the new normality, as we call it. So now for this training, you will be spending the next 5 sessions, I will say, with these people, my dear team member. I first want to congratulate them for what they have put together, because this is the first LPE training, I will say, that we do online. We used to do the local process expert training presential, which is a little bit more manageable because you're used to it. So now you are doing it online, so you wanted to bring, it required to bring a little bit, critical thinking in the way you design curriculum, in the way you're going to deliver. So this team was really instrumental in doing that, starting with the lead trainer, Brian here, Saida, Daniel, Saul, and Yolanda, that many of you may have interacted with during this preparation of the training. So again, I want to thank them, very much, and then they will have time, after my word, my 4 words, to introduce themselves and give a few words before we start the training. So I would like to wish you a very fruitful session. I hope it's going to be very engaging, and then you will get the best out of it. So thank you, and Brian, over to you.
Thank you, Cyril. Thanks for the introduction. Hello, everyone. I hope everyone can hear me. After that brief introduction, we're going to start explaining a bit what this whole training is about. Cyril already did mention a couple of things on it, but I'm sure you still have a lot of questions in terms of schedule, assessment, recordings, PowerPoints being shared with you, and so on. So we're going to go with that first. So again, good morning to all, especially to those of you that are waking up at 4 in the morning to participate in the session. Okay, one of the first things I do want to say is all the sessions will be recorded. Okay, we're recording every single session, and the link to these sessions will be shared with you after every session. So 10 minutes, 15 minutes after the session, we'll make sure we share the link with you guys, and you'll receive an email at the end of the day. So that is check, and it's out of the way. All sessions will be recorded, and also the materials that we share with you or that we present will also be emailed together at the end of the day. So you will have every single PowerPoint presentation we share here, and also the recordings. In terms of exercises that we will want you to practice, because we're creating some exercises for you guys to practice what we will be doing in this training, we will also share that with you, but that will take a little longer. Okay, we may do that either halfway through the week or at the end of the week, but you have your own time to practice these exercises, okay? So right now through the training, you just have to worry about attending, watching the recordings, and just making sure that you can log into this training, participate in the chat, and that's another thing I want to mention here. Our colleague Daniel Criado will be taking a look at the chat throughout this morning session. Any questions you may have, feel free to just unmute yourself and speak up, or write something in the chat and do it through there, right? Ask your question through there if you wish not to speak up. I'm sure that at the beginning, we're all going to be a bit shy. And then as we go on through the week, we're going to start intervening a bit more. We just don't want this to be a monologue. So when we start our training session, at any time, if something is not clear, please let us know through the chat or speaking up, and we will stop and make sure that we answer your questions. Yes, I heard a voice there, but
Brian, just
Daniel?
double check. This is Daniel Criado speaking. Just double checking. Are you sharing the screen? Because
no, not yet. No.
Okay, just.
I was just making sure I was speaking up first. And now that's exactly what I was going to do. Let me share my screen now. And please confirm you can see the PowerPoint presentation that I'm about to put in presentation mode here.
All clear.
Yes, we can see it.
Okay, thank you. Perfect. All right, very good. Well, at this point, Daniel, since you're in charge of the chat, if anyone is speaking up through there, let me know. I'm just going to start with this presentation. The recording is ongoing, so let's get going. You guys have already met the team, and what this presentation is going to cover is the following. So we're going to go through the scope of this training and the business processes that we're going to cover, the objectives of the training, our approach, the agenda, and then the topics, which are basically the supply chain storyboard, inventory and warehouse management structure, and material master data and master data requests that you will, I'm sure you've already been performing, but if you're new to all this, you'll learn how to do so as well. Okay, so the training scope, you guys have received a fax. Pretty much I just took the key ideas from that fax and put them on this slide. So you're all aware of what we are going to discuss throughout this training. And Cyril has already mentioned that. So we can skip through this slide and just go straight to what we want to cover throughout this training, which is the following. I think this slide defines very well what we're going to be covering throughout the week, okay? The focus of this training. Basically, we will learn or review, for those of you who are not experts in the subject, the contract establishment, the requisitioning process, solicitation contracts themselves, the acquisition of goods process. Now, this particular one here, and let me see if I can, here, let me go back. I can't mark what I'm doing right now at this point, but for the acquisition of goods, I know that particularly for this training, we have some members of the peacekeeping missions that deal more with inventory. I know some of you also receive goods into inventory, but others do not, right? So you may be familiar with storage locations or not familiar with them. In this training, we're going to be focusing a lot on the storage locations, the inventory management structures, purchasing goods for inventory, and so on. Although we will also explain the way of purchasing goods without going into inventory. For those of you who are familiar with that process, there's nothing new in that sense. But for those of you who are not familiar with purchasing goods for inventory, we will be covering the steps to do so. And also the impact of the transportation management system that now will require you to create a shopping cart a bit differently from what you're used to. So besides the fact that you're learning how to create a shopping cart for goods that are going into inventory, you're also going to learn how the impact in some certain fields will derive into the transportation management system in the long run. Also, the acquisition of freight services, which is now done separately from the acquisition of goods, and we will learn about that as well. Acquisition of consultants and individual contractors, LVAs, the service certification in ECC, and as well as we see here at the bottom left, the Galileo decommissioning project, which some of you may be familiar with or not. It's the integration of SRM with ECC, talking about the purchasing of goods for inventory, inbound deliveries, and the goods receipt, physical and virtual goods receipts. And then, as I was saying before, the transportation management integration, okay, with SRM, with the TM module. So I see that there's a lot here on the screen. There is a lot to cover throughout the week. We only have 4 hours a day. This is one of those trainings that maybe requires 7 or 8. But again, as Cyril was mentioning at the beginning, this is the current situation, and we have to adapt to it. Okay, so the training objectives mainly will deliver a number of conceptual presentations, and also we will perform transactions in the system, a demo style. So we will share our screen like we're doing now and go through the SRM system, raising a shopping cart step by step. The online sessions will be conducted through Teams. Now, I'm not sure if many of you are familiar with how to use Teams if this is the first time. So that's something that we may also want to ensure before we go on with the actual training and going into the system. If you're very familiar with Teams, let us know. But if you're new to Teams, also let us know, because that can mean that you don't know how to use the chat or use the channel or view the recordings and so on. So please let us know of that too. And the sessions of the training. We were receiving a couple of messages this morning about the sessions and not really understanding how well the training was structured. So basically, the training is going to go on from today, Monday, all the way until Friday. So it's a 5-day training, and it's split into 2 sessions per day. Each session is going to be 2 hours, 2 hours in the morning and then 2 hours in the afternoon. Although the invitation seems like it's a full day of training, it's 4 hours, 2 in the morning, 2 in the afternoon. Okay, and we can, you guys, if you just access the calendar invitation on Teams, you can see the details of that. Okay, I hope it's clear for everyone. And if it's not, when I go through this slide, you guys can let me know. And if there's any questions in the chat, Daniel, also intervene at any point. Okay, you should be released for the duration of the training. Hopefully you are. We had a training last week or a couple of weeks ago where staff members were performing their duties. Normally, again, we understand that your kids are home. You have to go and pick them up from school, take them to school. So we understand that there's many things that don't make this type of training easy, but we want you to know that we're here to help you as much as we can as well, okay? Each training session will be recorded and all the materials will be shared with you guys. So I think this slide is quite clear. We will also be diving into BI, okay, business intelligence, and we'll be viewing some reports on SRM in terms of contracts, purchase orders, shopping carts, and solicitation. And we will also be viewing some reports on equipment and inventory from the property management side of things. So we will also become familiar with not only where to find reports in BI, but also how to access them and how to share them maybe with a colleague, how to export them, and the basics on how to run these types of reports, as you can see here in this small screenshot. We'll have a session on that this afternoon, and we'll go into more detail with BI. Okay, the assessment. Okay, so what do we need for the assessment? I understand that not all of you can join the live sessions because, like we've seen in the chat, we have some colleagues all the way in Chile, all the way in Bangkok. So the time difference is huge. So we don't ask you to attend all the sessions. It's not mandatory, but please watch the recordings of the videos. That will help, as we will make these available to you. And then the online assessment will be shared with you on the 27th, okay, May 27th. Initially, we were thinking of the 26th, but we understood that some regions are still on holiday, whether it's the 25th or the 26th of May. So as we couldn't have a concrete date on that, we just decided to push it to the 27th. And what we'll do is share a link with you, keep it open for 24 hours, and you guys can take the assessment at any time you feel ready for it. So on the 27th, for 24 hours, the link will be open, and then you can submit your assessment. Please keep in mind that only the first submission is the one we're going to be considering. Okay, if you submit it 3 times, we'll only go with the first submission. And then successful candidates will be awarded the LPE certification through Inspira. Okay, that's on the assessment. The post-training package. So as I was saying before, we are working on creating a package of exercises for you. If you can't do them throughout this week, if we don't have them ready by midweek, you'll have them ready by the end of the week. And you will be able to practice the exercises that we're going to demo through these live sessions. Okay, you'll receive a cover page and exercises. We'll also explain that throughout the week if it's not that clear in this slide, or if it's not clear enough based on what I'm expressing right now. Okay, let's go through the agenda and schedule. As you guys may have received this agenda, we have made some changes to the original agenda we sent out, and that's because we thought that it would be easier for you guys to understand if we did a couple of changes. So let's just go quickly over the changes that we've made. So the times are the same, the dates are the same, it's just the topics of the day that have changed. I think before you had on day 2 contracts, but now we switched it to shopping carts for goods versus shopping carts for freight services. Okay, day 3, we're going to go over the contract establishment. Day 4, LVAs and IC&C. And day 5, the goods receipt process, mostly related to inventory management and warehouse management structures. So this is the breakdown of the week, the roles that are supposed to be involved in this training, whether you are a requisitioner and maybe even an inventory user. So when I've looked at the list, the majority of you fall under these work streams and roles, so we're okay. And then on May 27th, okay, which we consider day 6, but I know it's a couple of days after that, we have the actual online assessment. And a couple of things to keep in mind for the online assessment. It's a 50 multiple choice question assessment. And here, although we have a time duration of 60 minutes, we opened it up for 24 hours for all of you. What you do have to keep in mind is the passing rate is 70%, okay, to be able to pass this assessment. So when we send out the link on the 27th, remember, you have one chance, 24 hours to take it, and passing rate of 70%. So before I move on to this next slide here, any questions so far? Maybe if you want to speak up, or any questions in the chat in terms of agenda, assessment, how the training is going to work, or should we just move on?
Hi, Brian.
Yes.
Yes, so far, no questions in the chat. What I did is I posted a chat saying that for the ones for the students who are not very acquainted with MS Teams, we can help them out as well. So please speak up, or you can just drop a message individually to me, and I can help you out with chat functionality, with channel, how to work with Teams, because it's easy, and in 5-10 minutes I can walk you through the application if you need help on that regard as well. For the rest, we have no feedback so far. Over to you, Brian.
All right, thank you, Daniel. Thank you very much. Okay, so I found my marker finally, which is a good thing. It wasn't appearing at the beginning, and now you guys can see exactly what I'm trying to say. Okay, so what you see here is the business process scope, basically everything we're going to cover during the training, and we wanted to break it down for you like this in this first PowerPoint presentation. The only thing we would be missing here is the transportation management portion, but we don't want to give you too much information right from the beginning. We will be talking about the impact in TM as we go through the demos in the session. But we want you to understand the breakdown of this workshop like this, right? We're basically first going to talk about the purchasing aspect here, okay, and the breakdown that we have here, even though this slide first is only based on the purchasing of goods. We want you to understand that we're going to go over these processes: check stock, check budget, create a shopping cart, approve the shopping cart, PO, and also the approval of the PO, and how that is directly linked to the work streams of inventory management and also the warehouse management. Now, for those of you who do not receive goods into your inventory and storage locations, these aspects of inventory management and warehouse management may not make too much sense. We're not going to focus the training solely on this, as I was saying before, but we are going to have elements of this in the training, okay? How to receive virtually the goods, how to receive the goods physically, and what we're supposed to do in the shopping cart for this to go through smoothly. And also all the way up to the warehouse physical receipt of the goods, where we put away the purchased goods right here from the shopping cart all the way until the last step where we create our TO for put away in the warehouse. So for those of you who are familiar with inventory management and warehouse management, this is going to be a good review. For those of you who are new to this, don't be afraid. We're going to go over it it very easily and smoothly, and you will be able to pick up on any of the things we discuss in terms of storage locations and so on. Okay, let's go to our next slide here, and let's see in terms of the supply chain storyboard, what we're going to be talking about, basically the contracts establishment and the SRM portal, the goods and services acquisition, the LVA for goods, and CIC service acquisition, and how those have the downstream impact in ECC, goods receipt and service certification for goods and services, same thing for the LVA, and only the services for CI&C. Okay, for the SRM or Supplier Relationship Management System, we'll be demoing the creation of contracts, also the creation and establishment of contracts, the goods and services acquisition, CI&C contracts, and low value acquisition. Then from there, we'll jump into the inventory management and warehouse management structures, as we see here. Again, these are just slides for your information, but it's very important for you to review this in your own time and understand the structure and the connection between the three, because that is what we're going to be focusing on throughout this training. Okay, how SRM, which we'll be considering here, the purchasing, connects directly with ECC, whether it's in inventory and also warehousing. For those of you who do not purchase goods for inventory, it's not that easy to understand the direct link between the storage location added in SRM, and that's something that we may want to discuss as we go through the demo during the week, because I would like to know how you do things normally, day to day, versus those who purchase goods for inventory. Okay, the consumption versus inventory, and how those two can help each other during this training. Okay, so let's start with inventory. Familiar with, feel free to intervene at any time. For those of you who are new, we're going to go through the basic concepts of the inventory management structure and the warehouse management structure. This is mostly important when we're purchasing goods for inventory. Okay, so the management of inventory for the materials that we're purchasing, we're basically have to keep in mind the structural elements of plant and storage location. Now, we should all be familiar with these terms. Okay, plant is basically the mission, if we think about it, and the way we usually deal with peacekeeping missions, or the plant is the location where the goods are being purchased for, right? In this case, if we're thinking about a plant, we can think about any of the missions like ECLAC, or the entity in Bangkok, or we can even think of, if you're familiar with peacekeeping missions, MINUSMA, MINUSCA, Entebbe, and so on. Okay, and the storage locations, these concepts that we can think of, they're inventory concepts. So when we're purchasing goods, we want to make sure that these goods are going into our inventory. So they go to this place called a storage location into the system in Umoja. Now, usually not a physical location. We can interpret it as a physical location, but in the system, it's an inventory location. Like I like to say in our last workshop, it's as if we were receiving goods and we were keeping track of these in a piece of paper, but we physically don't have them put away yet in our warehouse. So that's going to be our main difference between our inventory management and our warehouse management of things, okay? And how these two always need to be connected, and they always need to be in line, right? Let's go to our next main functions of the inventory management. We're talking about goods movement of stock, goods receipt, goods issue, and stock transfers. Again, not sure how many of you are doing this on a daily basis, but we're going to be covering this mostly on day 5, but whatever we do from day 2 on will have an impact across these two structures, inventory and warehouse. Okay, if we jump into our warehouse management, we're talking more about the physical space. So again, the main difference between the two, inventory, let's think of it as conceptually a location in the system where we're storing our goods, versus a physical location, which is the warehouse, where we're physically storing our goods. Okay, and the structural elements of the warehouse are the warehouse, and we'll see this when we jump into the system, storage type, storage section, and storage bin, versus the plant and the storage location, which are inventory management concepts. So again, if we're talking about inventory, it's conceptual. The structural elements are mainly our plant and storage location versus the warehouse. If we're talking about warehouse, we're talking about a physical space, and its structural elements are warehouse, storage type, storage section, and storage bin. For those of you who don't work with this that often, these are structural elements that we'll see in the system, in Umoja. So when we're performing transactions in the system, we're going to be using the warehouse elements, storage type, storage section, and storage bins. We'll become more familiar with those concepts as we go on. Okay, and the main functions of the warehouse management structure are the transfer requirements and transfer orders, which we will be seeing mostly on day 5. Okay. Let's go on to our next slide and let's go into the concepts, right? We were talking about plant before. We just started introducing this concept. And again, sorry for those of you who are very familiar with this, but I'm going to take it as if we're all new to this and go through this slide slowly. So a plant is the location where materials are purchased, received, and inventoried, valuated, and shipped. So even right to the point where we're creating a shopping cart and we're purchasing goods, plant is going to become very important right from the beginning. We're telling the system exactly where these goods are being shipped to. It's also very important in terms of transportation management system. When we're telling the system what plant the goods are going to be shipped to, that automatically has an impact in TM as well when we're tracking the goods that are being transported. Also, I'm not sure how many of you use TM or are onboarded with transportation management as of yet. Maybe we can discuss this later when we come back from our break, but that would also be very good to know. Okay, the next topic, as we saw before, the next concept, sorry, is the storage location, which reflects the inventory owned by a particular funds center in a plant. So again, when we create a shopping cart and we're purchasing goods, we add our funds center to the shopping cart. You're very familiar with that portion, because they're the ones that are responsible for the goods that we're purchasing. And these goods are being sent to the storage location, which belongs to this particular plant. So again, right from the shopping cart creation, we are telling the system who owns the goods and where these goods are going to be stored in inventory and where they're going to what plant specifically, right? Whether it's a peacekeeping mission or not. Okay, then talking about the funds centers. One fund center can have multiple storage locations, so we become familiar with this, but no two fund centers can share the same storage location. So what does this mean? This means that, for example, engineering can have a fund center and multiple storage locations in a plant. So if we're purchasing goods for engineering, we can have 3, 4, 5 different storage locations that are all linked to engineering and share the same fund center. But then, for example, if we're talking about medical, transport, and engineering, those two cannot share, or those 3 cannot share the same storage location. It's going to become a bit simpler to understand as we go through the next slides. Materials in the inventory are managed in storage locations. So every time we want to see what materials or what goods we have recently purchased and are stored in a storage location, we are going to have to do that by selecting the appropriate storage location in the system. Okay, so let's now look at this with a couple of images. Maybe it makes it easier to understand. So if we're talking about a plant, in this particular example, we would be talking about UNGSC, which would be the base in Brindisi, okay, for peacekeeping missions, MONUSCO, MINUSCA, special political missions, or other entities. This would be considered a plant, and how these plants have storage locations, right? Linked to either engineering or CITS. And each one of these, which would be linked to a fund center, which is the one that will be owning these goods once they're in the plant, in the storage location. Any questions so far? If you don't intervene, Daniel, I'm just going to move on, but no one is speaking up. Remember, you can just unmute yourself and speak up as well at any point. I just want to make sure I don't lose anybody as I go on. If I don't hear from you, I take it you guys are following, so I'm just going to keep going. Okay, so our next slide. Again, a bit more of a breakdown of the plant and its connection with the storage locations. Okay, so we're talking about plant. Again, we can talk about a mission, let's say, in this case, the UN logistic base in Brindisi. But now in the system in Umoja, when we talk about plant, we're also talking about IT01. So when you go into Umoja and you're looking for a specific storage location in a plant, in let's say in Brindisi, we would have to make sure that we add the appropriate information in the system. And that information in the system looks like this. So IT01 is the plant in Umoja for the base in Brindisi, for the UNLB base in Brindisi. This one is linked to a series of storage locations. For example, communication, which in the system is 1101, is the storage location for communication that is linked to the plant logistic base, IT01. But there's not only one storage location in Brindisi, they have several of them, right? So we have the communications, we have engineering, medical, transport, etc. They even have, or we're even familiar with, for those of you who purchase goods with the Incoterm FCA, you may use even a virtual storage location, which is a location that is used for virtual receipts. So what we understand by this is that we don't directly yet have the goods in our location in the system, but we have to tell the system that we already own the goods as they're being acquired, right? So if we're talking about an FCA Incoterm at a point of handover location, when the goods are now owned by the UN, we would have to tell the system that at this point particularly, we have these in a virtual storage location, not yet at the final storage location in the base in Brindisi, for example. I heard some noise in the back. I'm not sure if somebody was speaking up.
No, not so far.
Okay, thank you, Daniel. Okay, and let's see the linkage of this with the fund and fund center. Okay, so if we're again still sticking to Brindisi, the plant and the storage locations, we see how these storage locations are linked to a fund center. Okay, and this fund center linked to the fund, for example, here, 20 BLA. So even when we're raising a shopping cart and we add our fund 20 BLA, we add our fund center and our storage location and our plant information, what we're doing, and that's why it's so important to do this correctly, is that we are also telling the system, if we are receiving the goods for inventory, that where we're going to be receiving these goods, where they're going to be stored in inventory, who is responsible for them, and where the money is coming from, all from the shopping cart portion. So right from the beginning, selecting the correct product ID, and we're going to jump into that in a second, adding the correct storage location, plant, fund center, and so on, is extremely important, as you see, through the downstream process, especially when we're talking about inventory management structure and warehouse management structure. Okay, we see here that the engineering storage location is linked to one fund center, as we were saying before. For example, for these two, we can think these two communication could be linked to the same fund center. Okay, but then when we're talking about engineering, medical, transportation, and so on, we have different fund centers. So remember, one fund center can be linked to several storage locations, but no two fund centers will share the same storage location. Okay, that's a very important concept to remember when we're talking about storage locations and fund centers. Okay, let's move to our next slide. And again, this is for these two types of storage locations. So a brief reminder, a storage location, if we're talking about medical section or engineering, this is where the materials are stocked and managed. Each of them linked to a fund center, reflecting the ownership of the goods. And the functionality is that it indicates receipt for purposes of inventory management and accountability. That versus the virtual storage location, which is a location outside the mission area. Now, again, sorry if we're always using mission area, but usually this type of training is always for the peacekeeping missions that do receive goods for inventory and really deal with the inventory management side of things. And then these locations, we're talking again about virtual locations, are not linked to any fund centers, but they do indicate the receipt of goods that are owned by the UN, not yet at final destination. Okay, we'll keep going. Let's take a look now at the warehouse structural elements. Okay, so what we understand by warehouse in the system and what we understand by warehouse physically, right? Or in reality, if we wanted to visualize what the warehouse looks like. Okay, so when we're talking about a warehouse in a specific plant, so let's think of a plant as Brindisi, and let's think of a warehouse as a location, a physical location in Brindisi. As we see in the image, we have A here, B, and C, which are 3 different warehouse locations within the same plant. Okay, and these have a storage type, which identifies the different buildings in a warehouse. So if we're talking about storage A or building B or Rub Hall C, which would all, we could say, are connected to the warehouse A or connected to the warehouse B or C. This would be one storage type in one warehouse. The storage section, which is a section within the storage type that is within a warehouse itself, it could be either a rack area, a pallet area, or a container area. We'll also learn about this on Friday. It's the last day of the training, but it's important that you guys become familiar with these terms. And then finally, the storage bin, which is where we finally have the final location of the goods that we've purchased and received into our plant, storage location, and eventually warehouse. Okay, so the bin is the final physical location of the goods that we've purchased. Okay, I'm only going to go through this slide conceptually. I'm not going to spend too much time on this because I know that we're not all going to be working with this, and it's only one day of our training, but I do want you to understand these concepts. So now, like we did before for the inventory management structural elements, let's do this now for the warehouse structural elements. So again, in the system, okay, the warehouse is also a location in the system. So for example, we can select warehouse 1 in Brindisi, which is actually Q01 in the system. So when we type in Q01 in the Umoja system, we're talking about one warehouse in Brindisi, which is warehouse 1. This means we can have warehouse 2, warehouse 3, warehouse 4, and they all belong to the same plant, which is Brindisi. This warehouse 1, again, particularly, has building 20, building 144, and zone 183, for example. So these will identify different sections in the warehouse. Okay, we also have the sections within each one of these, which could be the outdoor area, rack, shelving, container, or disposal area. Okay, so for example, let's think of building 020, which has sections within this building for outdoor and a section for rack, versus building 144, which only has a shelving area, and again, zone 183, which has a container area and a disposal area, all linked to one single warehouse. And these have different types of bins, okay, which are identified like this in the system. Okay, all these bins that can be connected to one specific one. In this particular slide, what we're looking at is warehouse 1, building 144, shelving area, and the shelving area, which has a different, at least 4 different bins within the shelving area. And they're identified with these particular numbers. So it's important that you understand these concepts. And I'm sure that those of you who receive goods into inventory are quite familiar with them. If there's anything I'm saying that doesn't make sense to you, or maybe it's a little too much, let me know and I can slow down. But since there is no comment or question, I'm moving on with the concepts. Again, this is just an introduction slide presentation for the first 2 hours of the session to give you guys an overview of the inventory management structural elements, warehouse structural elements, the basic shopping carts that we're going to be raising and POs that we're going to be raising and talking about throughout the training, master data as well. So just an overview of these concepts. That's all we're looking at throughout this first session. Okay, we're also learning that these storage locations can be linked to only one warehouse, okay, but several storage locations can be linked to the same warehouse, okay. That is something that should be also quite clear. So when we're talking about a storage location that is linked to a plant, we're also talking about a storage location that is linked to a warehouse. Okay, this storage location is linked to a fund center, which in itself is linked to a fund. But when we're diving into the warehouse management side of things, what we want to understand is that our storage location is directly connected to our warehouse, which in a sense is directly connected to a plant, fund center, and fund. Okay, and the structural elements of each one of these that we see here. Okay, warehouse, storage type, storage section, and storage bin. Okay, so these are the main concepts that I want to express. Make sure that they're clear in your mind. You understand the difference between one and the other. Again, only conceptually. There's only going to be one day in which we're going to be really playing around with these concepts. But if you're familiar with this from day one, that's fine. And if something is not clear, let us know as well. Okay, so again, just a slide for you guys to keep in mind and to review. This slide does divide the inventory management structural elements and the warehouse management structural elements. I think once you take a good look at this slide, you will understand the difference, at least visually, between when we're talking about inventory versus warehouse. Okay, more physical spaces versus virtual spaces, but still connected to each other. Okay, in the system. Okay, so in our bins too. Let's move on now to some basic concepts here. Nothing yet in terms of questions. Let's see now if we're talking about goods that we've purchased from a shopping cart that are going to be received into our inventory. Okay, so if goods are received into storage locations, inventory quantity, value, and ownership of goods and accounting aspects are updated. So for example, if we're talking about a laptop or here a set of boxes or a set of tires, right? All these have been purchased with a fund center and they're being sent or they're located in a particular storage location as we see here, okay? But then when we go into our warehouse management side of things, just because they are purchased through one fund center or one specific storage location doesn't mean that they can't be put away in a storage bin separately. So for example, we have our storage location 7100 with the boxes here and our storage location 7200 with our tires, but they're in a bin called 1000. Okay, so when they're being received into our inventory, they belong to a specific storage location, but in the warehouse, they belong to the same bin. Okay, so I hope these concepts are clear here. If I hear no questions, to me they are. I know this is a lot, but yes?
Yes, Brian. So far, I was just checking with Sol. She took over the chat because apparently there is a glitch and I have no access to all the comments. But over to Sol in case that there are questions or comments. Sol?
Yes. Hello, good morning, Brian. Regarding the topic that you are explaining right now, there is no question, but there is a couple of things related to the assessment that, if you agree, we could take over once you finish before the break, just not to change topic now, if you agree.
Okay, absolutely. So yes, in the next, we'll go for another 6-7 minutes and we'll take a break and then we can look at the assessment questions. Thanks, Sol. And
perfect, you're welcome.
Good thing that we found out about the glitch there, Daniel. If not, we would have thought we had no questions throughout the entire session. Okay, very good. So let's go into our material master data slide. Again, sorry for all that information that we're jumping into quickly, but there's a lot to cover. So material master data, and those of you that are familiar with this, very good for you. For those of you who are new to this or need another refresher, this is the time to pay attention in terms of material master data. We're also going to jump from this slide to the actual material master catalog in the system, so we can really cross-reference the concepts that we're looking here with the actual system and the catalog itself. So what do we understand with material master data in Umoja? Okay, well, everything we purchase from the beginning, from the shopping cart, whether it's goods or services, we're always talking about master data elements, right? We select the product ID from a catalog and we make sure that we're selecting the correct product ID. Let's think about, for example, brake pads or cell phones or a laptop computer. Right from the moment where we're raising a shopping cart, whether it's for inventory or for consumption, it is crucial that we select the proper product ID, right? Right from the beginning, master data becomes important. But master data in Umoja is not only that product ID that we're selecting, it's important for us because of the downstream impact that it has. But what is important to understand is that also the material master data elements in Umoja are many more, right? For example, when we're talking about the services, the product IDs, when we're talking about the materials that we're going to have in our system, the storage locations, the warehouse data, anything that we're talking about throughout this training, in a sense, is master data in the system. Let's take a look here. It drives all our business transactions and all our applications, and it's extremely important for the system to work correctly. If we're talking about TM, if we're talking about inventory, if we're talking about SRM, ECC, any master data elements are crucial to the transactions that we're performing in the system. Okay, so now that we understand that, if we're looking at our material master records that contain all the information from the materials that the UN procures, where it stores, where it's shipped to, and the integration of all this information, okay, with throughout all the different systems is extremely important in the training that we're going to be going through this week. Okay, we're going to be talking mainly about materials, but also some services during the training throughout some of these days. The materials that we're going to be talking about, the classification that they have, whether because they're classified based on nature, operation, or IPSAS classification. Also the product category that define the type of service or product that we're working with. Okay, and also, we're going to go back here, and also how it's managed in the system. So we're basically going to be talking about a lot about product IDs and how these product IDs are materials once we go into ECC in the system. Right from the get-go, when you raise a shopping cart and you select the wrong product ID, those of you who have been participating in the Galileo decommissioning project, or those of you who have had any sort of PIRO training or have been involved in any sort of data cleansing and inventory, know how important it is to select the correct product ID right from the beginning, right from the shopping cart. And that's what our main focus is going to be on, right? Correct product ID, what that means in the system, how to find it in the master data catalog, and how that has a downstream impact. But it's not the only master data that we have in the system. Okay, so the common types of master data that we have. Okay, sorry, let's go back here. We have our materials, okay, which contain all information about the products that are procured, stored, and shipped by the UN. And we also have our services, okay, which is an equivalent master data, but this one is for the services that are procured by the UN. Okay. Our business partners also are master data in the system, if we want to think of it like that, whether we're talking about commercial vendors, non-commercial vendors, or commercial customers. Okay. Also third party like member states, non-member states, government and local authorities, and also individuals like could be non-staff military and police, or staff members, ex-staff members, and survivors. So these individual, third party, and commercial business partners are also considered master data. And that's also important that we think of them as that in the system. Okay, our key components of the master data, as we see here, we have our business partner number, and okay, it's 10:54. I just want to make sure I don't go over. So before maybe I go into this slide, I think we want to take, even if it's a 5-minute break after every hour of session. So maybe the best time is to take the 5-minute break now and come back at 11. Okay, for those of you who want a glass of water, want to grab a coffee or anything, I think now would be the best time to do so before I even continue with this slide. Sol, if there's anything before that, maybe we can talk now during the break about the questions that were made on the assessment, so I have the answers ready when they come back.
Yes, just very quickly, because I wanted, maybe everybody is not reading the chat, just for everybody to listen the answers of these questions, because I think they are quite interesting. They ask a couple of questions. For example, if the exam can be taken at any time during the 27th of May. And Saida already confirmed that, yes, that it can be taken at any time. And the other question was if the assessment has to be done just once. You have to sit and do it, or you can save it and continue later on. And Saida already confirmed as well that you have to do it once you sit, you have to submit it, you cannot save it to continue later on. So anything to add, Brian?
No, actually, that's it. Those are the answers to those questions. So definitely you can't save it. You have to, you have to take it. It's not something that you can just save and go to later. If you close the page, you lost your exam. You'll have to start over again. And yes, you can take it at any time during the 24 hours. So yeah, the answers are correct there too. Thank you guys for monitoring the chat.
You're welcome.
And it's 10:55. If we want to take a break, now is the best time. We'll be back at 11 and we'll continue with the presentation. Again, remember, we're just going through concepts that we're going to be covering during the week, whether we're talking about master data, whether we're talking about inventory or warehouse, just conceptual. Once we start diving into demos and so on, these concepts will become real in our mind if they're not real enough already. Okay, so let's take our break and let's meet again at 11. Okay, so we're back from that short break. Yes, Daniel?
Just to confirm that I have access now to the chat. I did a couple of things in Teams and now it's okay. Thanks.
All right, very good. Was that you just calling me now?
Yeah, exactly. Just to confirm that I have a full access now.
All right, perfect. Okay, thank you. All right, okay, so let's go back to our presentation here. We were talking about material master data, and at the last topic was the business partner master data. Okay, again, just to discuss that we have several types of business partner master data as well. Okay, the BP number, all considered master data in Umoja, contact information, the banking information, and the payment condition are all master data elements linked to the business partner. So again, we're just going over the concepts of material master data, whether we're talking about product IDs, services, or business partners during this training. That's what we're going to be referencing them to. Again, also the Umoja system and how it structures material master data into different groups depending on the function and purpose. Okay, so if we're talking about a plant, it would be the top structure, which we were looking at before, Brindisi, for example, and then also the master data linked to the, for example, materials, funds, centers, and so on. Then transactional data, also considered material master. So it's the day-to-day data, which depends on accurate master data, for example, the POs and financial postings. So these are results of the transactions that we have performed. And that's why they're considered here transactional data. But again, they're data that the system generates based on the master data elements that we've selected. So very important to understand that structure. Sorry for the noise in the background there. And then also how this data comes down to the reporting part of our training, which is the BI and also ECC, which all this master data now can be gathered into reports where we can view materials, document lists, cost centers, and so on, generated from the reports that we're viewing. Okay, let's go now to the key points here in terms of reference data across Umoja. We were talking about the plant, business areas, and segments. So for example, the plant, we're familiar with that already, the location where materials are produced, purchased, and stored. The business areas, we have to understand that they're a classification of UN entities operating in Umoja. Okay, and then the IPSAS segment, which is the requirement that is achieved in the system using the functional area master data. And sorry for the noise in the background, guys. That's just what we have to adapt to these days. Okay, our common types of master data here, the vendor, customer, and sponsor. Okay, the material that we will be working with and the services. I think I can just skip directly to our next slide here and go dive into the material master data and how that is broken down into the system. So when we're talking about materials in this particular case and what we need to really focus on, we're also talking about product IDs, right? So the moment that we select, in this case, a projector from our shopping cart, and we're selecting our product ID 15001517, that is directly linked to our material master data. This, in a sense, is also linked to its product category and the way this is managed in the system, right? If it's serialized or not serialized, if it's batch managed, or if there's inspection required in this particular material, or again, last but not least, the financial management of this material. For example, the GL account that is derived from this product category, the asset or valuation class. So we see that all this is also considered material master data, whether we're talking about a product ID, its category, the way that it's managed, and the financial management linked to it. I'm going to jump from here directly into our what I wanted to show you in the system. So now that this last slide that we were talking about material master data, I think it's the perfect time to jump into the material master catalog. For those of you who are not familiar with how to access this and still go through the iSeek link and pull the Excel from the iSeek link, I think you guys all are familiar with that, or maybe not. I want to recommend that if you're not using this option to access the Material and Service Master tool, you can do it through here. So what I just did is I logged into Umoja, basically using my EADMS. I went to the All tab here, and I'm going to click on the Material and Service Master tool. Okay, we'll see when this loads. What we're talking about in this particular slide here, in this PowerPoint, product ID, product category, the material management, and its financial links, for example, the GL account linked, is very clear in this next, here, once the application starts. It'll become very clear when we start running the catalog. So for those of you who do not run this Material Master dashboard normally, it's very interesting for you guys to pay attention now and understand what we're going to be, how we're going to be using this. So you can basically log into the dashboard. It won't make a difference in terms of the results that you're getting, but you can always log in through with your IDMS and your email. Okay, and the way we perform our searches here, we have a drop-down menu, which will allow us to select one of the product IDs, again, in alphabetical order. So this could take quite some time if we wanted to search for something here. Okay, we can just use the and scroll down or up looking. But again, if we want to do it like this, we could stay here forever. So that's why we have two fields that we can perform our search by, whether it's just using one of them or two of them and using the and or option. So for example, here, if I wanted to use, for example, here, phone, and maybe here I wanted to use smart for smartphones. These are the fields that we could be using to perform searches and find out in the Material Master catalog in Umoja how many different options we have from this. So I'm not sure if it performed the search or not, or maybe if I didn't add the writing correctly, it will return 0 results. Okay, so it was loading, sorry. Okay, so I just added phone and smart, and I clicked on search, and I used the option and, so that the system is giving me anything that has the word either smart or phone in it. And I see I have a total of 11 items that I can select from. So basically, if I was selecting a correct product ID from a contract catalog, right? Because usually when you're raising a shopping cart, you're always going to first use the, if we're thinking about raising a shopping cart using a contract, we're always going to have a selected list of product IDs to select from. But maybe when we're looking at this list of product IDs, we think that these do not really represent exactly what we're trying to purchase from, right? The Material Master catalog that we're looking at here now will allow us to search for these items and find out if what we're selecting is the proper product ID. Okay, if for example, I'm writing here smart and phone, and I go down to the results that I can see here, I see that I have 11 results, and I see that we're talking about the material number here. The short description is microphone, smartphone, so maybe that's not what I want. Long description, the unit of measure, the material type, group, the GL code linked to it, the GL description, so consumable audiovisual equipment, and if this is batch managed or serialized. So we can see right from the first line here that this item would not be batch managed or serialized. So if we're purchasing a smartphone, maybe this is not the one we want to select. So it's very important that you become familiar with this catalog and ensure that when you're performing a search or a selection of a particular product ID in a shopping cart, you're selecting the correct option. Okay, if we look at this one ending in 41, when we're talking about smartphones, cellular, Android, advanced, you see we have several. We have the advanced, we have the entry, and we have the standard, all linked to cellular Android. And each one of these with a different serialization option, and then if it's batch managed or not, they're all linked to the same GL account and even the product category, and they're all the same type of material. But of course, selecting advanced, entry, or standard is not the same thing, right? If I select the top option, that doesn't mean I'm selecting the standard option. So we always have to be careful in that we're selecting the right product ID so we don't have a downstream impact in the long run. And once we're receiving it into our inventory, we realize that we have to backtrack and actually erase the entire PO and start from scratch again. Same thing goes for the iOS, Advanced, Entry, and Standard. So 3 different types of product ID for what looks like the same type of cellular smartphone. And then just what look also like more standardized or generic product IDs for stabilizer smartphone or tripod smartphone. But we always have to ensure right from the beginning that we have the correct product ID selected. This Material Master Catalog is the place to go to ensure that the product IDs we're selecting are the correct ones. Learning how to use it is very important too. Again, if I want to write here smart and now change here to phone and perform a search, you can do that. Again, you can always export whatever results you have as well. This noun description field here doesn't really, you can't type anything here if you wanted to. Wait a second while this loads. If we wanted to add any sort of description, you can't use that. What that will do is add the description once we select something from the drop-down menu here. I'll do that next. You see, for example, now switching from and to or with smart and phone, I have 163 results. So now maybe it would be better to export this into an Excel and perform the filtering later. Okay, so, or just again, as I was saying before, make the selection from the drop-down menu here. Okay, if I was looking for the 3D laser surveying scanner, you can also perform the search there. Make sure you take out any other details and perform the search for that directly. You see how now the noun description is automatically once I've selected from the drop-down. You have here a device used to capture existing terrains, build conditions for complex geometrical detail, etc. And only one specific item. Okay, so I just wanted to go through that quickly for you guys to understand where to find it and how to use the Material Master Catalog if you don't know already. Okay, so basically what I did is just logged into Umoja, go to my All tab here and select the Material and Service Master tool. Once you click on that, the system will open the Material Master Catalog, and using it is actually quite simple. Okay, Sol, any questions on this? Or Daniel, if since you have access to the chat already?
Yeah, everything is clear. I did post a couple of screenshots on the Access. And obviously, this is a good tool in order to, before you raise a shopping cart, to understand the details of each of the product IDs and whether it's batch managed or whether the product has to go through some quality control process. So obviously, that mostly applies for entities with inventory or warehouse, but nevertheless, it's important to raise, that all specifications for all product IDs are stored over there and are maintained by a specific team in Brindisi. So I think it's a good thing to start using it from the start now, in case that our students are not doing so already. Over to you.
And just one thing, Brian. I don't know.
Yes.
Samuel asked something about the sense serialization profile. Exactly what is the sense serialization profile?
Okay, yeah, I saw that. I think what he means is here. If I go back to the phone, I think I saw that when I was looking at the phone. So there's several types of serialization profiles. Here, I'm going to go. I think we saw it here. If it's not the OR option, it's the AND option. But you see the serialized UN01, which is usually the serialization option that we go by when we're in Umoja. But you also have the UN05, and there's other types. I can't really tell you the difference of them right now. I could look into it, and maybe that's a good question to take note of. I think it's right here, what I'm looking at right here. This one, the serialization profile here, ZENS, Z-E-N-S. I think that's where the question was coming from when we're looking at this type of serialization profile. It's the way it's going to be managed in the system, right? The serialization profile that either if it's UN01, UN05, or ZENS, it's just the way that these are managed in the system. Now, I have to look into that to tell you exactly what this ZENS stands for, because we usually always manage the UN01 and the UN05s. Unless somebody knows maybe that is attending and can give us an insight on that. Okay, we're talking about the serialization profile ZENS. And I think that's exactly where I saw it. So I think that was what the question was all about. Here, I think here we have a better view.
And just one more thing, Brian. Just let me. Rama asked if you could explain a little bit, what do you mean by batch manage? Batch manage.
Okay, sure thing. Okay, so very good. As we see, for example, what we're talking about here, right? I think it's a headphone, right? Let's look at this second line. We're talking about a headphone amplifier. For example, this one doesn't say that we need to either manage it through serialization or batch manage it. When we're talking about batch management, for example, if we're talking about blood or vaccines, right? We've purchased blood or vaccines from a shopping cart, and now we're receiving them into our inventory. These are automatically, when you're selecting the correct product ID for batched managed materials, let's say blood or vaccines, in the system, in Umoja, automatically there's going to be a flag that says, you know what, this type of material needs to be batch managed. What that means is that we need to make sure that we have, if we need an expiration date for this blood, it needs to be set. If there's an expiration date for the vaccines, or if the vaccines need to be kept at a certain temperature or in a certain section, they need to be batched managed. Okay, it's not the same thing as serialization. Serialization goes more for laptops and the barcodes in a laptop, right? So we understand the difference between the laptop that I have in front of me and the one right next to it. They have a different barcode serialization. But when we talk about batch managed, we know that blood has an expiry date, and we know that vaccines may need to be kept under certain conditions. So that's what that means with batch managing. We need to take care of something that has either an expiration date or that needs to be handled in some sort of specific way, because it could go bad, right, at a certain point if it's not kept under certain conditions. I don't know if that was clear enough or not, but usually in Umoja, when we talk about batch manage, we're talking about blood and vaccines that we need to add a specific date of expiry when we receive them, so that we understand when we want to maybe we want to goods issue vaccines or blood. This batch management will help us understand if maybe something is expired already and we shouldn't be using it. If they weren't batch managed, we wouldn't be able to use them. Yes, so.
Yes, Rana confirmed that it's clear. Okay, thanks a lot. Okay. And we have another question from Sana. She's asking if is there a process by which we can add new products ideas to the material master?
Okay, well, there's a process to request the addition of a new product ID. Like, for example, if you usually you look through the catalog, right, to find the correct product ID, and you think, okay, let's say this headphone is exactly what I'm looking for. Now, usually when you're raising a shopping cart, let's say without a contract, right, where you have to add the product ID that you find here in the catalog. Because if you're selecting the product ID from a catalog, we're thinking that the product ID is actually accurate directly, right? But let's say by any chance, these headphones or a water pump or a brake pad or whatever it is you're adding to the shopping cart is not exactly what you think you should be adding, you can always request it, okay? And maybe here I can jump in quickly. Our last slide here. I'm just going to jump quickly to my last slide, and then I'll come back to this. Okay, we've added a slide here that also has the link to what you're exactly asking, right? The request for material master data. So just because we don't see the product ID in the catalog doesn't mean we can't request it, right? If you're familiar with iSeek, if you've gone to iSeek, there's a direct link that we've added here that I can go to right now, where you can access the forms that you need to fill in to request a new product ID. And then the master data team in Brindisi will evaluate if this product ID is in fact not there. And yes, we can create a new one, or if there is one that actually responds for that product ID that you're looking for. Okay, but the process is that when you first looked for that product ID, if you feel that it's not there or it doesn't represent exactly what you should be purchasing, then you can request the master data through a form under iSeek. If you want, I can actually go there directly. And Sol, I'm not sure if that answers the question, but yes, you can't create one directly, but you can request the creation of a product ID.
Okay, So yes, Sana confirmed that it's clear, and we don't have any more questions.
Okay. Okay, very good. So again, Sana, if once you receive this presentation, okay, you can simply, I believe we can simply just copy and paste this link on the slide, and it should take you directly to the forms, right? There you go. I don't think it jumped directly to the forms here. No. Okay, so let me just go through it quickly and make sure I add the proper link to this one. Okay, and if not, I can do it later on too. Okay, so we have, once you access this page, you simply have to reach out to the material master data link. And sorry, my screen is not loading here on time. And maybe I can show you this. I'll make sure I have the proper link in a couple of more screenshots, but basically where I'm accessing right now, you have the links to select from. So maybe I can just copy and paste this proper link here and add it to the presentation. Okay, but again, remember, you need to do this through the access. For example, here you see material services, material master, and the info path that you need to select to request the appropriate either materials or services. Okay, so we would have to go through iSeek. Okay, once you're in iSeek, you would simply go to the master data maintenance link, or I'm going to add this link directly to the PowerPoint presentation. Scroll down from the page that it takes you to, all the way to the links for the material services here, service master or material master. Okay, and here you go. It asks me directly to save the file, but you need to request this. All right, next thing, and let me go back up to my slide here. Now, you guys see a lot of slides here. I think we've gone through them quite quickly, which is a good thing. That was my last one. And let me see, let me go from here. And I'm glad that we are answering all the questions. Sorry for that serialization type that we didn't have an answer to, but we'll look into that one and get back to you. Let's move on with our PowerPoint here. So for material master data, the material number or product ID, right? So from the selection of the correct product ID in the shopping cart all the way to the material number, or when this one is disposed in the system, that product ID number or material number, eventually when you're in ECC, will be linked to this product from beginning to end, meaning from the moment it's purchased to the moment it's inventoried, warehoused, and even decommissioned or written off in the system. It's going to be part of that material for the entire life cycle of this material. So we're looking at this projector, this box here, beginning with 15, ending in 1517, throughout the entire Umoja process, from the procurement system when we're purchasing it, through the inventory management, through finance, and even the management of this equipment in the system. This product ID is going to be linked to that particular projector from beginning to end throughout its entire life cycle. Okay, and again, selecting one product ID or another will eventually have this impact on the material. The system will tell you if it needs to be serialized. So materials with the serialization flag require barcoding. Okay, as I was saying before, so it's necessary to create records in the equipment master, and we'll show you this on day 5 once we're receiving the goods through the physical or virtual goods receipt. For example, a server is product ID or a material that would be serialized. When we're talking about batch managed, what we're talking about here is the control of, for example, shelf life, expiration date, or vendor batch, right? If, for example, the vendor has specifications on a specific material that we're adding to a shopping cart that needs to be batch managed a certain way. For example, rations in this case, okay? We were talking about blood before, vaccines. Rations is another example of batch managed material. And then also quality managed. So there are 3 different types of flags. The quality managed flags is usually based on contractual terms. For example, the vaccines in this case can also be quality managed. Okay, if they need to be kept under a specific temperature, that means that there's a quality managed for these as well. And they can even have a blockage in inventory to avoid you from issuing them out if they're not supposed to be issued out. So again, 3 types of flags for product IDs that we're adding to a shopping cart: serialization, batch managed, or quality managed. And again, sorry for all that background noise. Not sure how loud it is on the other side, but everyone's back to work in this part of the world, phase 1, and we have a lot more noise than we're used to before. Okay, so let's go back to our materials now. Now we're going to be understanding not only what materials are in the system, but what types of materials we can be dealing with. So the fact that I select one product ID over another in a shopping cart is not only that, right? I'm not only telling it that I'm selecting a projector, I'm not only saying that I'm serializing this material, but also if this material is an equipment, if it's a fixed asset, or if it's an expendable. Okay, so the materials also fall under this classification: equipment, fixed asset, and expendable. And now let's look a little more into that. For example, if I'm talking about materials that are equipment, okay, we're talking about objects that are maintained, okay, as autonomous units and can be installed at functional locations. So an example for this equipment could be a laptop. Let's go with a simple example, and maybe one we can use also throughout the demo. So if we're talking about a laptop, we're talking about a product ID, we're talking about a material, yes, but this material is an equipment, and it will be flagged for serialization. So usually all materials that are equipments will be flagged for serialization. Okay, will be flagged for barcoding. So for example, here, all equipment are serialized materials, meaning it's assigned a unique number for the equipment master. Items with an equipment master record can be tracked for issue to individuals, operational maintenance, stewardship purposes. Okay, again, if we select a material number ending in, for example, 5105 or starting with 15, what we're talking about is a laptop. We're also saying that it's material type ZSAA, which is really just nomenclature identifying this material. We're automatically telling the system that this is not batch managed, that it's serialized, yes, and again with the UN01 serialization value, and the quality management, no. Okay, so right from the beginning, the selection of the material has all that downstream impact into the system. Okay, the process implications are the following, right? These items are serialized upon receipt and assigned a unique ID for the equipment master record, and it will be managed, assigned, and maintained through the plant maintenance function in Umoja. So right from the beginning, once we select it from the shopping cart, that's already one critical step. And then once we receive it into inventory, the second critical step is assigning it a serialization number that will also be linked to it throughout its life cycle. Okay, so we go back to the materials, and we see that we have another material type. We're talking about fixed assets. So fixed assets, again, what we can think of fixed assets is also something that we can think of as an equipment. For example, fixed assets can be vehicles. Vehicles are also considered equipment in the system. But why are they considered fixed assets? Because of their value, right? They have a value that is above the IPSAS threshold, and that automatically sets it in the system as a fixed asset. We'll also understand that there is a fixed asset master record as well. So although we're receiving all the goods into our inventory and we have them under an equipment master record, we also have a fixed asset master record, because again, fixed assets are dealt with differently, not only operationally, but they also have a different impact financially. That's why they also have a different master record. So again, materials can be equipment or materials can be fixed assets. They're fixed assets if they're above a certain threshold defined by IPSAS. Okay, again, an example could be this one here. We're talking about a computer server in this case. The number for the product ID for an asset starts with 21. The material type is also different. Again, we do have the flags for batch management or serialization or quality. In this case, this is serialized, so the server will be serialized too, just like any other equipment. And here we go. See, fixed assets are capitalized at the point of control. So again, the fact that we're talking about a fixed asset or that this material falls under the fixed asset category has financial implications. Okay, let's move on now to our third category of materials. So we have equipment.
Brian?
Yep.
Sorry to interrupt, but I think it's the right point. Raymond asked if you could tell the importance of when to select a serialized product ID or a non-serialized product ID.
Okay, the importance of, so basically if you're selecting, you should always select a product ID that has a serialization to it. For example, if you're, this really comes down to how you manage things back in your inventory. But for example, if we're talking about a laptop computer, you should always be selecting a product ID that has a serialization linked to it, especially when it's going into inventory. And now the fact when you're selecting one versus another, one product ID that needs serialization versus one product ID that doesn't, I think it comes down to the way you manage your goods, either in your entity or if you're having them go into inventory or not. As far as I know, when you're purchasing a product ID that is supposed to be serialized, let's say a computer, you're supposed to select the proper product ID that has the serialization flag with it, so that once it's received into inventory, it can be serialized and it's a requirement. Okay, so basically if it's going into inventory, it needs to be serialized. And if it's not going into inventory, now the way you're doing things, if for example, I don't know if you receive things into inventory or not, but selecting a product ID that does not have a serialization flag on it, as far as I know, basically comes down to if you're receiving it into inventory or not. Now, Sol or Daniel, if you guys want to jump into that one.
As well, it has some implications in terms of physical verification as well. So whether you do want to physically verify that piece of equipment, let's say, you need it to be serialized as well. So actually it depends on the selection of that product ID. At the end of the day, it's the strategy from the requisitioning or procurement point of view. But definitely, if you really want to track down and do a property stewardship of the equipment, especially if we are talking about equipment, those pieces of items should be really serialized in order to be physically verified, and eventually, if they are in inventory and a warehouse, to do the property counting and controlling process as well. So and eventually as well, when you assigned to a specific piece of equipment to a staff member, if that piece of equipment is serialized, it's better. I mean, it's easier to track down and to identify who belongs to. And in case that you want to reassign, for example, or move back to inventory, that piece of equipment, if it is serialized, you can track down as well. So the implications are there. Whether you select one or the other depends on your need, on the initial requirements from your entity. It's not a yes or no, or a good or a bad selection here. It's depending on your need, but down the road it has some implications. That's my 2 cents on that, Brian.
Thanks, Daniel.
Brian and Rana, yes, as Daniel mentioned, she commented in the chat that all equipment that should be physically verified should be serialized. So it's important, as you guys mentioned. If we have a serialized, is better than to use this one in the case of pieces of equipment and fixed assets too.
Exactly, right? Fixed assets that are also considered equipment, as we were saying before, that are received into inventory should have the serialization flag, right? As you see the downstream impact of that, once you're doing physical verification, you need to have the serialization, the item serialized. Now, the thing, why does the master data catalog have product IDs that are not serialized? If we went back to this master data catalog, you'll see that the ones that were not serialized were quite generic product IDs. And they're available for selection. So if you are purchasing from a contract, let's say, you should probably only have the product IDs that are serialized or marked for serialization. The danger comes in when you're not purchasing from a contract and you're adding this product ID manually and you're adding one that doesn't have the serialization flag. But again, if you're only purchasing it for consumption, and I don't know how many of you out there only do that, The dangers of not serializing it for those that purchase for consumption are beyond me, because basically if you are receiving it and consuming it automatically, you're never going to physically verify it. It's not going into a storage location or a specific bin in a warehouse. I'm not sure the downstream impacts that can have for you, but I do understand the ones that it does for those that receive into inventory. Like Daniel said, and also in the chat, so I can't remember the name, but one of our attendees was also mentioning that if it's received into inventory, you should select the one that is serialized or flagged for it. Okay, so if there's nothing else on that one, I'll move on. Hopefully it was clear for all of us. Okay, and let's go to our last category for the materials. It's the expendables. Okay, so these are materials that are not equipment nor fixed assets. Okay, and they're tracked by quantity and not individually. Okay, so if we're talking about, for example, spare parts, brake pads, for example, that are expendables, those would be, if you want to visualize what types of materials would be considered expendables, that would be a good example. Right here, see, supplies that are not serialized could be spare parts, finished products, medical supplies, rations, depending on the type of material. So if we're not talking about a laptop or a vehicle, any other type of material could fall under this expendable category. Okay, even petrol, oil, lubricants, even packaging materials. What that looks like, for example, here we have a different set of numbers. Could be 16, 12, 14 even. So usually 15 and 21 are for those that are considered materials that are either equipment or fixed assets. Any other numbers leading this material number would reflect this expendable category. For example, here we're talking about vaccines, right? The material type ZMSE. Are they batch managed automatically? Yes. And quality managed? Yes. Okay, but they're not serialized because they're not equipment. Okay, the process implications for this, if we're talking about vaccines specifically, okay, the material is set to be quality managed. When it's received, it will be automatically routed through the quality inspection process. We were talking about this at the beginning, but we may have missed this since we're selecting the correct product ID. And again, that's why it's important to select the correct product ID when you're receiving something into inventory. The product ID automatically, when it's being received, will be flagged, and it will cause the system to automatically block this material for inspection. So it's very, very important that when we select the product IDs, we know we're selecting the correct ones. Okay, this is a nice slide breaking down the types of materials that we have with their product ID numbers. So we see fixed assets starting with 21, equipment with 15. But again, be careful, not all equipments start with 15. We see here supplies that are not serialized, also starting with 15. We have our spare parts, finished products, and each one of these starts with a different number here. And depending on the one that we're selecting and the category that they fall under, they can either be quality managed, batch managed, or serialized. Okay, this is definitely a good slide to take a look at. And let's go on to our next slide here. So a bit more of the breakdown of the difference between a fixed asset, equipment, and spare parts. Okay. We have our slide here. So again, remember, materials divided into 3 classes: fixed assets, equipment, and expendables. And depending on which one we're selecting, we have different flags for each one of these types of material. Okay, so here's our breakdown again. And let's see now if we're looking at the material master and the breakdown of the this master into the equipment master record and the asset master record. So let's go back to thinking about fixed assets, right? A fixed asset, for example, it's part of the material master data that we have, but there are 2 types of master records. A fixed asset, for example, would be in 2 different records at the same time once it's received into the system. It would belong to the equipment master record because it's considered equipment, but it would also belong to the asset master record. And now, what does that mean, belonging to one or the other or to both at the same time? If when we receive a good, right, a material from, let's say, a shopping cart that we have generated, a PO that was approved, now we receive it into our inventory, This fixed asset is also considered an equipment. These must be tracked, installed, maintained, operated, managed, and so on. So eventually, once we receive it and we serialize it, it belongs to the equipment master record. But since it's a fixed asset, we also have an asset master record. And what does this mean? It means that the UN materials have a financial value above the IPSAS threshold, also have to have an asset master record, which has its own financial implications in the long run. Okay, so they all belong to the material master data, but they are in separate records. And when we start managing this material in the system, we also need to keep that in mind. We're not going to dig into the equipment updates and how these have to be changed in the system throughout this training, but it's important for us to understand that that a product ID, once received into inventory, can fall under two different master records. Okay, let's go on to our next slide here. Again, just more of the same that we have already become familiar with. Any other questions, Sol? Since I know that maybe you don't want to intervene while I'm speaking, but I know that people are becoming a little more active now.
No, just some comments, some discussion. Yeah, what wrote that all equipment should be verified. Therefore, there is no need to have non-salaried materials. So why don't they remove it from master data? And there was a kind of discussion, but I think everything is clear. If it's not like that, please guys let me know, and we will raise the question. Because Rana, if you want, I can read it. Rana and snow monitors are below threshold, should not be verified, but they are serialized for tracking purposes. So just a discussion.
Yeah, exactly. And this is one of the discussions that is ongoing, right, for the past, I think, 2 years or even more than that, right? The fact that we still have in the catalog product IDs that do not have the serialization flag, right? And it prompts for the mistake of selecting the one that you shouldn't be selecting. But I know that this continues to be there because of those that are purchasing for consumption. It's something that we can dig into a bit more and maybe provide more information in a follow-up email or in a follow-up session, okay, as to why they continue to be there. But for now, I think that the idea is clear and the concept that we wanted to come through has come through. All right, so yes, thank you.
Because we have Jacquard confirm what you just mentioned, and Thomas is asking what does exactly mean order as direct material?
Okay, so we will see that when we demo tomorrow in SRM. There is an option when you're raising a shopping cart, right? There is a checkbox, basically. It's a checkbox that once you select it, what you're telling the system is that you're purchasing materials, right? The materials that you're adding to this shopping cart are going to be received into inventory. All right. If you do not check this checkbox that is called order as direct material, what you're telling the system is that these items are not going to be received into inventory. They're purchased for consumption. And that works for all materials except the fixed assets. With the fixed assets, it works the other way around. You never check this box. Okay, you leave it unchecked. But I think when we dive into this tomorrow, it will become clear. But so you understand, order as direct material means purchasing for inventory. If it is selected, if it's left blank. Yes?
And if I may, I think it's a very good question because it's precisely one of the main points of mistakes or troubleshooting things that we want to, let's say, underline throughout this week. Those are like control mechanisms that we really want to build on in terms of knowledge, so we don't commit any mistake when we raise a shopping cart. So thank you very much for those questions and those comments, because that gives us a little bit more perspective of your needs and where the gaps are. So when we do perform them demos, we put a little bit more emphasis on the items that we think that are required for you to do a perfect requisition from A to Z. Over to you, Ryan. Thank you.
Thank you, Daniel. Thank you very much. Okay, so this next slide here, and we have still another 15 minutes before the end of our session here. I think we'll be right on time to make it to the end of my slides. I don't necessarily have to go through all of them, but I wanted to make sure that the key points are clear, and you guys can always take a look at this in your own time. And thank you for the questions. I know that at the beginning of the session, you guys felt a bit shy or that weren't sure what to ask, but now I see that we're becoming a little more active, and that's a very good thing. Okay, so here, what we see in this slide, it's basically just a breakdown of what it looks like to receive a computer server with a product ID starting with 21, which means it's a fixed asset, which it's in our material master record. It shows like this, and automatically, because we're receiving this into the system, we have an asset master record and also an equipment master record. And what is the impact of that? So for example, based on the definition in the material master, if item requisitioned is a fixed asset, then an asset record is created. And we'll see that tomorrow too, right from the beginning, because our example is actually performed with fixed assets. So the minute we add our fixed assets to our shopping cart, we have to create a shell, right? An asset master record that is created right from the beginning during the shopping cart and the requisition. And then from there, servers are received into Umoja, and here's where the equipment master record is generated, right? Servers are serialized due to definition of the material master, and now they belong to the equipment master record as well. So right from the beginning, the computer server that is added to a shopping cart, there's an asset master record created right from the shopping cart level, and then once it's received into the inventory, there's an equipment master record linked to it. And that's why a material like a computer server can have both an asset master record and an equipment master record. If we're only purchasing equipment, for example, a laptop, we wouldn't have to create an asset master record from the shopping cart. We would simply, once we receive it, have an equipment master record for it. Okay, and let's move on to our next slide here. I think that should be quite clear. We have our equipment in use and the operational management classification of our materials. Okay, so remember the materials are classified with fixed assets, equipment, and expendables, but there's also different types of classification for material based on the operations. So the classification for the operational management of the materials is as follows. So we're still talking about equipment, we're still talking about spare parts and fixed assets, but there's different nomenclature for these. For example, the equipment in use, or simply equipment, or if they're consumables. If we're talking about consumables, we're talking about items that are bought for immediate use. And this is something we were discussing here a bit, right? What do I do when I select the order as direct material? What if I select a product ID that doesn't have a serialization number? So when you're purchasing things for immediate use or consumption, the process is different from when we're purchasing goods for inventory. But still, there is a classification for that in our material master record. Okay, we have our inventory materials versus our consumables. So our inventory materials are the ones that are procured specifically for inventory, decision at time of requisition. So again, that checkbox for order as direct material or not, and not consumed immediately upon receipt. Okay, they're stocked and managed centrally as inventory. So in the past, even those that do have an inventory in a storage location, like a peacekeeping mission, like a MONUSCO, for example, they could purchase goods, or they used to purchase goods for consumption directly, because basically they would never receive them into inventory and they would just start using them immediately. After the Galileo decommissioning project, it started being mandatory for all the materials that were purchased from a shopping cart were to be into inventory directly. Nothing was purchased for consumption again. Everything would go into inventory, and once it's in inventory, you would issue it out for a specific project, cost center, or WBSE. So that's where the main difference happened, right after the Galileo decommissioning project. But now still, for entities like some of them that are joining us today, you do not have an inventory. You do not have a storage locations, as far as I know. So you continue to raise shopping carts to consume these goods directly and not to inventory them. And that's where I think we could have an interesting conversation. So the way that these materials are managed falls under this slide here when we're talking about consumables versus equipment, equipment in use, or equipment in inventory. Okay, and exactly, and the fixed assets that we saw here, equipment that has a value above the IPSAS threshold. So still, we're talking about equipment, we're talking about fixed assets, and we're talking about consumables when we're thinking about the classification of materials operationally. Okay, and then we also have the classification of the materials under IPSAS, and this will be the last slide that I'll be showing, and I think we can leave the last 5 minutes for some discussion. Okay, under IPSAS, we have the materials that fall under the categories of equipment in use, inventory, and fixed assets. Okay, so these three classifications. With fixed assets, we're already familiar with. We also have the materials classified as fixed assets that form part of inventory will have a financial value. So remember, we were talking about the records, the material master record for fixed assets, and how it had a financial impact as well. So there is a record for these fixed assets exactly for that, for this financial inventory. Okay, which is a subset of the operational inventory, which is reported on the financial system based on IPSAS 2012 guidelines. Okay, and again, if we're talking about the IPSAS guidelines, and we'll finalize with this, if you're not familiar with this, for the recognition of fixed assets, the UN recognizes existing assets as either cost or fair value, and the acquisition subsequent to adoption of IPSAS shall be recorded and recognized at cost. So the conditions must be met to capitalize an asset for the UN. Again, the IPSAS threshold that we were talking about before in terms of value, we also have to keep in mind that the asset has a useful life of more than a year, that the asset meets the fixed asset capitalization threshold that we were talking about before, and the value of the item can be measured reliably. All right, I think that could be the last slide that I want to spend some time on. The rest of the slides that I'm showing you now are basically just for you to understand the capitalization thresholds of the materials that we're talking about, whether we're talking about land in this case, or buildings and real estate, and the threshold for that, because not all these materials have the same threshold, okay? A vehicle will not have the same threshold as a infrastructure asset or a building or an asset under construction. Each one of these has their own. We have a breakdown here in the slides of the threshold per material. For example, a vehicle here, an ambulance, will have a threshold of 5,000. So what that means is if we're purchasing a vehicle in a shopping cart, we're selecting the product ID for an ambulance, for example, right? Or something else, a forklift, and that threshold or the value of this vehicle is over $5,000, that means that it's over the capitalization threshold and automatically considered a fixed asset. Okay, and each one of these materials has a different capitalization threshold. As you see, the communication equipment up top has a threshold of 20,000 versus vehicles, machinery, and furniture, which have the threshold of 5,000. Okay, same thing goes for the intangibles. And I think I want to leave it at that. My last slide here, just the breakdown of the categorization of materials, whether by nature, by IPSAS, or its operational management categorization of the materials. Okay, so still 6 minutes for the end of the session. Good time to stop and maybe talk about any questions that you may have or concerns.
Brian?
Yes.
Jawad made a very good comment on the chat. He just mentioned that now we have mainly to buy material for inventory and not for consumption. And that's maybe one of the reasons why it's better to select materials that are serialized.
Exactly, right? That's what we were talking about before. And I think I made mention to it is that, but again, Jawad, if we're talking about peacekeeping missions that have an inventory to receive the goods in, definitely everything should be received into inventory. My concern is that there are some attendees here that belong to entities that do not receive goods into inventory. So there's no way of doing this, right? But exactly, the word written in stone is everything should be purchased for inventory. And that's why it's important that when we select the material, the product ID, we're selecting the one with the serialization flag on it. Okay, but yes, Jawab, thank you.
We don't have any more questions in the chat.
Okay, thanks, Sol. And yeah, now I took out the presentation. I can see the chat too. Thanks, Daniel, for posting this screenshot. I think it's also a good time to remind people, if you're not very familiar with Teams, anything can be added through the chat. You can add a Word document, a PowerPoint presentation, or just a screenshot like Daniel just did. Okay, if you see the screenshot that Daniel added here, it's the overview of the PP&E lifecycle from the creation of an asset master record. Okay, when we're talking about a fixed asset, a vehicle, the acquisition, depreciation, physical verification, repair, transfer, and retirement of this asset. Okay, so thanks, Daniel, for that. Anything we share in this chat will always be available for you. Okay. If you guys access your chat here, for example, here, you'll be able to see anything that we have added to the chat, as well as the Teams channel, which is completely different. If you guys have been added to a channel here, Source to Acquire LPE Training, we can also chat through here. For example, if I test this and I say hi, you won't see this in the chat of the actual meeting, okay? But it is a place where we can also share files, share the recordings, and we are all members of this channel directly, okay? We can always go here to keep the chat going, but if you only participate in the chat of the meeting itself, for example, if I open this here, let me just click on it. If I use this chat and I write on this one, you will only be able to see this chat in the meeting that we're having right now. So for example, in the afternoon session, when we log back into this chat, you'll still be able to see all other comments from people. But if you want to just use the channel, you can just select the channel that should have appeared now under your Teams icon here and write through here, share any files through here as well if you don't want to add them in the chat particularly. Okay, that's just a little heads up. I don't see anything new in the chat out there. I know it's been a long morning session. 2 hours listening is quite a lot, but now's a good time. Thanks, Daniel, for the survey shared. So what we plan to do, and it's worked very well with our past trainings online using Teams, is to share a very short survey. If you guys look at the chat right now, you should see a link shared by Daniel that you can simply click on, and it should load a new page that will appear here. I think Microsoft Forms, it should be loading not for too long. And here what we want you to do is to rate each session, whether it's the morning session, afternoon session. We'll have a survey for each session. Rate it, I think it's from 1 to 5, correct, Daniel? Depending on the information that you've gotten from this session, if it is what you expected. Yes, Daniel?
It's 1 to 10, and then
1 to 10.
Second question on free comments or any feedback will be recorded. Yeah.
Okay, I'm trying to see if it's going to load. For mine, it's not loading yet. Hopefully for the rest of you, it is. If you guys could just confirm that you can access this link and you can see a survey and actually submit. Okay, thanks, Mina. So Mina's saying taking time to load. Okay, so we're having a loading issue. All right, yeah, same thing is happening to me. Not sure if maybe it's just taking a bit. They usually work very well. We only had this loading issue, I think, once in 2 weeks.
Yeah, I mean, they can take it from now to 10 minutes, 15 minutes. It will be opened. Yeah. So it doesn't.
I'm just going to try. Yeah, I'm going to try to copy and paste it. Maybe if it works differently. But if it's not loading, okay, it doesn't make a difference. Okay. If it's not loading, you can always take it later. We just wanted to make sure that you guys take your time to provide feedback. So if you don't do it in the morning session, maybe we can do it in the afternoon session if it works. Okay, again, this was, okay, same thing, Mina. Okay, thank you. So hopefully
Hello, Brian? Hello, Brian?
Okay, I'm back. I think you guys lost me there for a second. All right.
You're back.
Okay. Yeah, connection is not looking that good right now. You can still hear me, Daniel?
Brian?
Yes, Sol?
Yeah,
we can hear you, yes.
Okay, perfect. Well, anyway, I was just saying that this session was quite conceptual. Hopefully we got across. Thanks for the conversation started in the chat. We really appreciate it. And the more we can get conversations like that going, the more we're going to get out of this training. There's nothing else I want to add except for take your time to answer the survey. Thanks for participating. It's only our first session. We have a whole week ahead of us with a lot of demos to go through in the system. I don't know, guys, Sol, Saida, Daniel, if you want to add something else. I'm going to stop the recording now and stop sharing my screen.
I'm just posting again the link to the survey, and hopefully it will work. If it doesn't, we will take a look at the settings of forms, but that's quite strange if it doesn't work.
Yeah, it usually worked very well. These are things that you can never prepare for, right? Something works perfectly well for a month, and then the very next day it doesn't. This is something we've never had issues with in Teams. It actually worked very well. That's why we kept doing it. Hopefully in the afternoon, we're luckier. But still, thank you guys all for joining. Any questions? We still have time to go through them. I know it's already 12, and that's the end of our morning session. We'll meet up again at 2. Okay, again, this session is being recorded, so I'm going to share the link with you as soon as possible, as soon as it's available to me. If there are no questions, I'm going to stop the recording, so please let me know. Okay, so I'm stopping the